I still remember the smell that day: baked lasagna, garlic bread, and roasted vegetables. The scent hit me before I even reached the kitchen, before I saw what my children were eating, before I realized something inside me was about to break. It was supposed to be a simple Sunday lunch at my parents' house, something we did every few weeks. My sister, Emily, was already there with her 2 kids, and I had texted Mom earlier that morning to say I'd bring dessert. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious, just another family meal. When I walked through the back door, the laughter came first. Emily's voice, light and confident, filled the room. My parents chimed in, happy, comfortable, the kind of warmth that used to make me feel safe. But as I stepped closer, I noticed my children weren't part of the laughter. They were sitting on the living room floor, plates on their laps, eating sandwiches, cold, plain, and slightly soggy. At first, I thought maybe they preferred it that way. My oldest, Ben, was 10 and polite to a fault. My youngest, Ava, was 6, easily pleased. Maybe they'd refused the lasagna, I thought. Maybe they'd asked for sandwiches. But when I glanced toward the dining table, the truth was undeniable. Emily's kids sat there, plates piled high with lasagna, using the silver cutlery my mother kept for special occasions. My father was cutting extra pieces for them while my mother poured apple juice into tall glasses. The same apple juice my kids weren't allowed to have because sugar is bad for their teeth. Something in me froze. I looked at my kids, their faces expressionless, quiet, as if this was normal. And then it hit me. Maybe it was normal. Maybe this had been happening longer than I realized. Mom turned around and smiled, that tight, polite smile she used when she was caught off guard. She said something about how Emily's kids were hungrier and there wasn't enough lasagna to go around. She said she'd make another batch next time. But I could see the pan, still half full, steaming and golden. There was more than enough. I tried to swallow my anger, but the sight of my kids quietly eating their cold food on the floor while their cousins laughed at the table lit something dark inside me. I helped them up, took their plates, and told them to sit at the table. The room went silent. My father's expression hardened, my mother's smile faded, and Emily just kept cutting her lasagna like nothing was happening. I didn't make a scene, I didn't yell, but I felt every piece of my childhood begin to shift. The rest of the meal passed in strained silence. My kids ate quietly, my parents avoided eye contact, and Emily scrolled through her phone, pretending not to notice. When it was time to leave, I packed up the leftover lasagna and told Mom I'd return the dish next time. Her lips tightened, but she didn't stop me. That night, after I put the kids to bed, I sat in the kitchen and stared at the dish. The lasagna was still warm. It wasn't about the food, it was about what it represented. Years of favoritism, years of quiet dismissal. I thought about how my parents helped Emily with her mortgage, how they watched their kids for free, how my mother bragged about Emily's promotion but never asked about mine. I thought about the time I gave them money to help fix the roof, only to find out later they used it to buy Emily a new refrigerator. And now, this, my children eating sandwiches on the floor. Something had shifted permanently. I didn't know what my next move would be, but I knew there would be one. I wasn't going to let this go. Not this time. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept seeing my children's faces, the quiet way they accepted being treated as less. And I realized that the problem wasn't just my parents, it was me. I had allowed it. I had spent years excusing their behavior because they were family, because I thought that keeping the peace was better than causing waves. But my children were learning from me, learning that love meant tolerating disrespect. And that realization made my stomach turn. By the next morning, the anger had settled into something colder, clearer, a kind of quiet determination I hadn't felt before. I started replaying every family gathering, every small slight, every hidden comparison. I began to see the pattern for what it really was. Not just favoritism, but control, emotional manipulation wrapped in politeness. A system that kept Emily as the favorite and me as the responsible one, the helper, the giver, the reliable backup plan. That realization hurt more than the lasagna incident. It made me question everything I thought I knew about love, family, and loyalty. But it also gave me clarity. I decided then that I wouldn't confront them right away, not yet. That would give them power. They'd twist my words, gaslight me into doubting what I'd seen. No, I needed to be smarter. I needed to understand why. I needed proof. So I started paying attention. The next family event was 2 weeks later, a small barbecue for my father's birthday. I arrived early again, deliberately, and what I found that day made everything even clearer and uglier. My parents had been helping Emily in more ways than I ever knew. As I stood there in their backyard watching Emily's husband unload a brand new grill, I realized the lasagna wasn't the beginning. It was the latest chapter in a story I had been too blind or too hopeful to see. And what I was about to uncover next would shatter the last illusion I had about my family. The morning of my father's birthday barbecue was clear and bright, the kind of summer day that should have been filled with warmth and laughter. I arrived an hour early, pretending I'd come to help set up. In truth, I wanted to see things as they really were. Unfiltered, unprepared, before anyone could rearrange the mask they wore around me. The first thing I noticed was the new grill. It was massive, sleek stainless steel, polished knobs, a side burner, even a mini fridge attached. The kind of grill that cost more than I spent on groceries for a month. Emily's husband, Jeff, was setting it up like a proud new homeowner, though they never had a backyard large enough for it before. My father stood beside him, handing over tools, laughing in that easy way he never used with me. I asked about it, lightly, pretending curiosity. My mother smiled and said it was a joint family gift, though I knew I hadn't contributed a cent. No one had even asked me. That small lie was confirmation enough. The favoritism wasn't hidden anymore. It wasn't about subtle gestures or quiet neglect. It was blatant, out in the open. I spent the rest of the morning watching how they interacted. Emily's kids were treated like tiny royalty, given juice boxes before the food was even ready, allowed to run through the house without reprimand. My children were told to stay outside, as if they were intruding. My mother shooed them away from the kitchen, saying she didn't want too many hands near the food. But when Emily's daughter wandered in, she was offered a spoon to help Grandma stir. I saw it all. I said nothing. I stayed quiet because I knew silence was my weapon now. If I reacted emotionally, I'd be branded as dramatic, ungrateful, sensitive, all the words my mother had used before when I dared to question her choices. No, I needed to collect the truth in silence. Let them build their case against themselves. As the guests began to arrive, mostly family friends and neighbors, my parents made a show of introducing Emily's husband as the perfect son-in-law. My father praised his work ethic and his good taste, nodding toward the grill. No mention of the fact that Jeff had been out of work for 6 months, and Emily had been quietly borrowing money from my parents just to pay bills. I knew, because she'd accidentally sent one of her desperate texts to me instead of Mom. But that was how it always went. Emily's failures were softened, rewritten into noble struggles. Mine were magnified. When I worked long hours, I was neglecting my kids. When Emily did, she was providing for her family. The double standard had become a second language in our family, fluent, automatic, cruel. Later that afternoon, I went inside to get water for my kids. My mother stood by the counter, slicing a cake, the same cake I'd baked and dropped off the day before. She'd placed it on one of her fine serving trays, the kind she never let me use. When I mentioned it looked nice, she waved a hand and said, "Well, it needed presentation." I smiled, that polite, distant smile I'd learned from her.
And then I saw something on the counter that stopped me cold. A folded check, half tucked under a stack of papers. My name was on the top, or rather a copy of my name. The check had been written from my parents' account to Emily Grace Holdings, LLC. The amount? $15,000. I didn't even know Emily had an LLC. She worked part-time at a boutique, barely enough to justify a business license. My stomach twisted. I slid the papers aside and caught sight of another, a bank transfer printout. The name on the recipient line wasn't mine, but the sender's memo read, "From Tania's savings." My blood went cold. It took me a few seconds to understand what I was looking at. My parents had access to a joint savings account, one I'd opened years ago to help them pay medical expenses when my father had surgery. I'd left the account open afterward, thinking it was harmless. I used it occasionally to deposit money for emergencies. And now, I realized they'd been quietly withdrawing from it, funding Emily's supposed business, her vacations, her new appliances, all using money that was supposed to be for their care. My head started to spin. I put the papers back as I'd found them and walked outside, numb. Every laugh, every smile, every gesture from my parents felt poisoned now. That night, when we returned home, I pulled up my online banking. The transactions confirmed everything. Over the past 9 years, my parents had withdrawn more than $42,000, all labeled as family support or household repairs. The latest transfer, that $15,000, had gone out just last month. $42,000. My savings. My children's savings. Money I'd worked for. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the screen and felt my world tilt. All the years I'd told myself they didn't mean harm, that they loved me equally, that maybe I was overreacting, it all collapsed. They hadn't just favored Emily emotionally, they'd stolen from me, quietly, systematically, while pretending I was part of the same family they'd long since divided. I spent the rest of that night at the kitchen table, making lists. I wrote down dates, transactions, events, patterns of behavior I'd ignored. Every family dinner, every time they forgot to include my kids in gifts, every accidental oversight that had slowly chipped away at my dignity. By dawn, I knew what I was going to do. I wasn't going to confront them yet, not directly. They thrived on control, on my reactions. This time, I was going to take that away from them. I would give them exactly what they'd given me: silence, distance, and a false sense of security. Because when I finally confronted them, it wouldn't be emotional. It would be final. And it would cost them everything.
For the next few weeks, I lived 2 lives. On the surface, everything looked the same. I answered my mother's texts. I liked Emily's photos on social media. I even dropped off a casserole when my father wasn't feeling well. But underneath the calm, I was building something, a quiet, meticulous record of betrayal. Every night, after the kids were asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and a notebook. I scrolled through bank statements, emails, and message threads, piecing together the story of how my parents had been siphoning my savings. It was astonishing how easy it had been for them. A few joint authorizations, a few quiet transfers, no questions asked. They had counted on my trust, my guilt, my desire to keep the peace. They had counted on me never checking. Each withdrawal told a story. The $3,200 for roof repairs coincided with the month Emily's family took a cruise. The $5,000 for medical bills appeared days before my parents posted pictures from their trip to visit her in Florida. The $7,800 home improvement payment lined up with the week Emily's kitchen remodel began. The patterns were undeniable. But the numbers were only part of it. What broke me was the realization of intent. They hadn't just taken because they needed help. They had taken because they believed they were entitled to it, that my success, my stability, my responsibility existed to balance Emily's chaos. It wasn't love, it was exploitation disguised as fairness. Once I had gathered enough proof, I started thinking about the next step. I didn't want a confrontation that ended with another round of apologies and excuses. I wanted accountability, real, tangible consequences. But more than that, I wanted freedom, for me and for my children. That's when I decided to visit my parents, unannounced. It was a Wednesday afternoon, quiet, calm. I parked 2 houses away and walked up their driveway with a neutral expression. My mother opened the door, surprised but smiling. I told her I'd stopped by to drop off some grocery items, just small things from a sale. She thanked me and invited me in. My father was in the living room watching TV, and Emily's car was in the driveway. They were together. Perfect. I sat at the dining table and looked around, the same table where my children had once been told to wait for leftovers. My mother poured me tea, her tone light, casual. She mentioned how busy Emily had been with her new business venture. I kept my face calm. I let her talk. Every sentence she spoke confirmed what I already knew. They had no remorse, no guilt, no recognition that they'd done anything wrong. When I left, I knew I was done trying to fix things emotionally. This wasn't a family that could be healed with a conversation. It was one that required exposure. Over the next few days, I transferred the remainder of my savings to a new account under my name only. I changed passwords, revoked authorizations, and called the bank to flag all transactions on the joint account. The representative confirmed what I already suspected. The most recent withdrawal request had come just 2 days before. They were still taking, even after everything. I didn't tell them I'd closed the account. I let them believe they still had access. A week later, I received a text from my mother asking why the transfer didn't go through. She said she needed to help Emily cover a business loan. The message was polite, almost casual. My hands trembled as I read it, not from sadness anymore, but from the sheer audacity. I responded with a single sentence, "I'll look into it." But I didn't. I waited. The next step came from an unexpected place, my father's accountant. I had emailed him weeks before, under the pretense of updating my contact information. He responded with a copy of a tax summary that listed shared family contributions. There it was, in black and white. My money listed under parental support, categorized as gifts. They had filed it that way for years, quietly claiming it as if I'd willingly donated thousands of dollars to them and to Emily's business. That was the proof I needed. That night, I printed every document, every bank record, every transfer slip, every email and message thread, piecing together the story of how my parents had been siphoning my savings. It was clinical, detached, professional, the opposite of how I felt. But that was the point. This wasn't about emotions anymore. This was about evidence. When I was done, I sat in silence. My kids were asleep, the house dim. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to earn approval that was never mine to have. The years of small humiliations disguised as tradition, the endless comparisons. I realized that I had never truly been part of that family. I had been the supporting character in their story of favoritism. That realization hurt, but it also freed me. The next morning, I booked an appointment with a lawyer. I told him everything. He listened quietly, flipping through the documents as I explained the withdrawals. He nodded slowly, then said words I hadn't expected.
This isn't just unethical. This is financial abuse. He explained my options: legal reclamation, asset freeze, even potential fraud charges if I wanted to pursue them. I didn't know yet how far I'd go, but I knew I wasn't going back to pretending everything was fine. That evening, I received another message from my mother. It was short, clipped. "We need to talk. Your father is upset." I didn't respond. Instead, I looked around my home, small, modest, but filled with warmth and honesty. My kids played quietly in the living room, their laughter unfiltered, unafraid. For the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless. I felt steady. I knew that soon there would be confrontation, a breaking point that would change everything. I wasn't sure how ugly it would get, but I was ready. They had taken my money, my trust, my peace of mind. But what they didn't realize was that I had something far more dangerous now: the truth. And I was going to use it.
The confrontation came sooner than I expected. It was a gray Sunday afternoon when my mother called. Her tone was sharper than usual, clipped and controlled, the kind of voice she used when she thought she was about to correct me. She said my father wasn't sleeping, that he was worried about me, that they deserved an explanation about why the bank was suddenly acting strange. That last phrase confirmed it. They'd already tried to access the account again, and now they were panicking. I told her I'd come by that evening. I didn't tell her I was bringing the binder. When I pulled into their driveway, the sky was heavy with clouds, the air thick with that electric quiet before a storm. I sat in the car for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, feeling my heart thudding in my chest. I wasn't there as the dutiful daughter anymore. I was there as the woman they had underestimated for years. Inside, the house smelled like roast beef and potatoes, my father's favorite meal. My mother had set the table neatly, as if a warm dinner could soften what was coming. Emily's car was there too. Of course it was. She was already in the living room when I walked in, legs crossed, expression coolly curious. My father sat in his recliner, silent, arms crossed. My mother stood near the doorway, her posture defensive. The silence stretched. I set the binder on the table. They looked at the neat labels, the printed pages, the quiet precision of it all. My mother's hand twitched, but she didn't touch it. I began to speak, my voice steady but cold. I explained everything: the withdrawals, the transfers, the falsified gifts, the tax filings. I told her how I'd closed the account, how I'd moved every remaining cent, how a lawyer was reviewing every transaction. I didn't accuse, I didn't yell. I simply stated facts, page by page, until the weight of the truth filled the room like smoke. At first, my father tried to interrupt, muttering about misunderstandings and family helping family. My mother chimed in, saying they'd always intended to pay me back. Emily said nothing, just watched me with that familiar, superior calm, the kind that used to make me shrink. But not this time. This time, I let the silence hang until my father stopped speaking. Then I turned to Emily and said, not aloud, but through the quietness of my days, that I knew. I knew everything. Her eyes flickered, just for a second. Enough. That was when my mother's tone changed. She dropped the guilt and replaced it with fury. She said I was being selfish, that I owed them for everything they'd done for me, that families don't keep ledgers. I looked around the room, the house I'd grown up in, the walls filled with framed photos of Emily's children, barely any of mine, and I realized that in a way she was right. Families don't keep ledgers. But then again, families also don't steal from their own and tell their grandchildren to eat sandwiches on the floor. When she finally stopped talking, I told them calmly that I wasn't there for an apology. I didn't expect one. I was there to draw a line. I told them I wouldn't be part of this family anymore, not in the way they defined it.
I told them they'd taken enough. Money could be replaced. Trust couldn't. My father stood up then, voice raised, face red. He said I was tearing the family apart. But I knew the truth. It had already been torn long ago. I had just finally stopped pretending the pieces still fit. When I left, no one followed me out. The air outside was heavy, the sky finally breaking into rain. I sat in the car shaking, not from fear, but from release. It was over. Or so I thought. That night, the messages began. My mother sent long paragraphs about forgiveness and honor. Emily posted a vague status online about family betrayal. My father called once, left a voicemail about fixing this privately, but I didn't respond. For the first time in my life, silence was my protection. Days passed, then weeks. My parents tried to reach out through my extended family, spinning their version of the story, that I was ungrateful, confused, led astray by lawyers. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just focused on my kids. We started spending Sundays our own way, at the park, at the movies, cooking dinner together. The peace that filled our home was different now. It was quieter, but it was real. My children no longer flinched when I mentioned Grandma and Grandpa. They simply shrugged, as if the spell had been broken. And yet, beneath that peace, I felt something unresolved. Because despite everything, I knew my parents still had leverage. Emotional, social, maybe even financial. There were still documents I didn't have, still things they hadn't admitted to. That unease grew when I received a letter in the mail one Thursday afternoon, a formal envelope addressed to me from my father's lawyer. Inside was a single page. It was a notice of reassignment of family property interests. According to the letter, my parents had restructured ownership of certain assets, namely the lake house that was supposed to be split between me and Emily after their passing. The document stated that, due to my recent behavior, they had amended their estate plan. Emily was now the sole beneficiary. They had disinherited me. For a long time, I just stared at the paper, numb. It wasn't about the money or the house. It was about the finality of it, the punishment, the message. They hadn't just stolen from me. They wanted to erase me. That was when something in me hardened. They thought they were closing the story, but they didn't realize I still had the binder, the documents, the proof of financial misconduct that could unravel not just their savings, but their reputation, and Emily's business, too. They had drawn their final line. I was about to cross it. And this time, I wasn't going to play nice.
The letter stayed on my kitchen counter for 3 days. Every time I walked by, my eyes caught the bold black text, reassignment of family property interests. The phrasing was cold, clinical, deliberate. I could almost hear my mother's voice behind it, dripping with false righteousness. It wasn't about the house. It was about punishment. They wanted me to feel small again, desperate to get back into their good graces. They wanted to remind me that I was replaceable. But this time, they had miscalculated. On the 4th day, I opened my laptop and pulled out the binder. The thick stack of papers was heavy in my hands, but heavier still was the knowledge it contained. Each page was a quiet confession of what they'd done. Every unauthorized withdrawal, every falsified tax record, every lie told under the guise of family help. I knew what I had to do. That morning, I called my lawyer and told him about the letter. He asked if I wanted to contest the disinheritance or take a different route. I told him I wanted something stronger, something permanent, something that couldn't be rewritten with another legal document. He asked if I was prepared for the fallout. I said I was. The next few weeks became a blur of quiet planning. My lawyer helped me draft formal requests to the bank for historical records. We compiled everything into a comprehensive file, dates, amounts, signatures.
He advised me to contact the tax authorities as well, since several of the gifts listed by my parents could qualify as unreported income or fraudulent deductions. I hesitated at first. Reporting my parents felt too extreme, too final. But then I remembered the look on my kids' faces that day, sitting on the floor with their cold sandwiches while their cousins laughed at the table. And I realized that silence was the only thing that had allowed this to continue. So I filed the report. The process took time, but the effect was immediate. Within weeks, my parents received official correspondence requesting clarification about financial discrepancies. I knew the tone of those letters: formal, relentless, unyielding. The same system they had used to take from me was now turning its gaze toward them. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one explaining myself. They were. I didn't hear from them directly at first, but word travels fast in families like ours. My aunt called one evening, voice hushed, saying my parents were devastated. My mother had apparently told everyone that I had turned the government against them. Emily was furious. Her business had been flagged for review since several of her payments were tied to the same transfers. The same paper trail that protected me was now exposing them. The irony wasn't lost on me. Still, the satisfaction wasn't pure. There was no joy in watching it unfold, only a quiet, grim validation. I had spent so long doubting myself, wondering if I'd imagined the favoritism, the manipulation, the theft. Now there was no doubt left. Everything was on record. A month later, I received a message from Emily. It wasn't an apology, it was a threat disguised as a plea. She wrote that our parents were heartbroken, that I was destroying the family, that I should fix this before it went too far. She ended with a line that made my hands shake. "You don't want your kids to grow up without grandparents, do you?" I didn't respond. I forwarded the message to my lawyer. After that, the silence between us became total. My parents didn't call, Emily didn't post. The absence of their noise was strange at first, like a radio gone dead. But over time, that silence became peace. In its place, I started to rebuild. I focused on my kids, their laughter, their small victories, their resilience. We spent weekends hiking, baking, reading. I watched them thrive without the invisible weight of judgment hanging over them. I started to feel something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. But the story wasn't done. One morning, I received an envelope from my lawyer. Inside was an update. The investigation had confirmed multiple unauthorized transfers from my account. The total amount exceeded $50,000 once adjusted for interest and unreported use. Legally, it constituted misappropriation of funds. The bank had offered to assist in reclaiming part of it through a civil process. He asked whether I wanted to proceed with charges or settle, quietly. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the letter. I thought about what it would mean: court appearances, family members taking sides, the final destruction of whatever thread remained between us. And then I thought about the years I had already lost, the time spent chasing their approval, the money spent out of guilt, the peace stolen from my children. So I told him to proceed. The months that followed were exhausting, not dramatic, not cinematic, just heavy. Forms, signatures, affidavits. My lawyer handled most of it, but I felt every consequence ripple through the family. My parents were furious, humiliated. Emily's business folded within weeks of losing its funding. The lake house was quietly listed for sale. The stories they had told about being betrayed by me started to lose their power once the facts became public. People began to see them differently. By the time the settlement was finalized, I had recovered almost half of what they had taken. But what mattered more was the message: that I wasn't powerless anymore, that they could no longer rewrite the story. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post about it. I just sat on the porch one night watching my kids chase fireflies, feeling the soft weight of peace settle in my chest. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a question still lingered. What happens when justice is done, but the wound remains? Because even though the money was back, even though I'd finally stood up for myself, part of me still grieved. Not for them, but for the family I had always hoped we could be. That illusion was gone now. What remained was reality, sharper, lonelier, but finally honest. Still, I knew there would be one last chapter to this story, one final reckoning before I could truly close it. And it would come sooner than I expected.
It happened almost a year after that first confrontation, the one with the binder and the rain. Time had dulled the immediate sting, but not the scars. I had settled into my new rhythm: work, home, my children, peace. The legal matters were behind me now. The money was partially recovered, the account secured, and the investigation closed. The silence from my parents had become normal. Until one afternoon, an invitation arrived. It came in the mail. Thick cream cardstock. My name written in my mother's looping cursive. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside it read, "Family dinner, Sunday, 6 p.m. Let's try again." No apology, no explanation, just that. A simple plea disguised as an olive branch. For days, I left it sitting on my kitchen counter, unsure what to do. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part, the part still haunted by all those years of being left out, of my children being second, wanted to see what they had become after everything. I wasn't naive anymore, but I was curious. I wanted to know whether they had changed, or whether they were still the same people who believed love came with conditions. So I decided to go. When Sunday arrived, I drove to their house with calm detachment. My children stayed home with the babysitter. I wasn't risking another scene. As I turned onto their street, memories rushed back. All the family gatherings, the laughter that had always felt half-aimed. The driveway looked the same, though the house felt smaller now, older somehow. When I stepped inside, I was met with quiet. My parents were already at the table. My father looked thinner, older. My mother, too, her posture softer, her voice lower. Emily was there as well, though her confidence was gone. The air was heavy, polite. There were no gifts, no decorations, no fanfare, just a table set for 4 with simple dishes: roast chicken, salad, bread. It was strange being back there. The same table where my kids had once been denied a plate of lasagna now felt like a courtroom. The meal began quietly, awkwardly. My father spoke about the weather. My mother asked about the kids, her tone tentative. Emily stayed silent, eyes fixed on her plate. And then, without preamble, my mother said something I hadn't expected. She said they were selling the house, downsizing, starting over. She said the stress of the last year had been a lesson, that she and my father had lost sight of what mattered. Her voice trembled as she said it, the words heavy but careful, like each one had been rehearsed. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. Then she looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. And in that moment, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not the manipulation, not the superiority, but regret. Real, raw, painful regret. She said they had been trying to help Emily, that they believed she needed more, and that they had justified it by convincing themselves I was strong enough to need less. It wasn't an excuse. It wasn't even forgiveness. It was truth. Ugly, broken, human truth. My father didn't say much, just nodded quietly, eyes fixed on the table. I knew he wouldn't apologize outright. That wasn't who he was. But in his silence, I heard something like surrender. Emily, on the other hand, couldn't meet my eyes. Her business had collapsed after the investigation. She was working again, a regular job, nothing glamorous. Her tone was subdued when she finally spoke, admitting that she hadn't known where the money had come from, but that she hadn't asked either, that she hadn't wanted to know. The meal ended quietly. No dramatic outbursts, no screaming, no tears, just silence. And in that silence, something inside me shifted. I realized that I didn't hate them anymore. I didn't forgive them, not fully. Some wounds don't close like that.
But the hatred, the anger, the need for revenge, it was gone. I had already won, not because I'd taken them to court, not because I'd exposed them, but because I had broken the pattern. My children would never sit on a floor eating leftovers again. They would never be taught to accept less because someone else demanded more. That was the real victory. After dinner, I helped clear the plates. An old habit, but this time on my own terms. As I stood at the sink, washing the last dish, my mother came beside me. She didn't speak, but she reached out, resting her hand briefly on mine. It was a small gesture, almost hesitant. For a second, I let it stay there. Then, I pulled away gently. When I left, I didn't look back. The house was fading behind me, bathed in the soft glow of evening. I knew it might be the last time I ever walked through that door. And for the first time, that thought didn't hurt. As I drove home, I thought about everything that had led to this. The cold sandwiches, the lasagna, the years of giving and being dismissed. It had all led to this quiet ending, not explosive, not cinematic, but real. Closure doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it comes with stillness. When I got home, my kids were curled up on the couch watching a movie. They looked up and smiled when I walked in, their faces open, unguarded. I sat down between them, pulling them close. And in that moment, I felt it, the peace I had been chasing my whole life. Not the kind my parents offered, full of conditions and guilt. Not the kind built on silence, but the kind that comes from finally choosing yourself. Because in the end, that's what the story was about. Not revenge, not retribution, but release. I didn't need them to change anymore. I just needed to stop needing them. And I did.